viewers. Welcome to the third episode of A New Order, a special discussion series with industry leaders in collaboration with Dr. V. Sumantran, Chairman, Stellaris Technologies. And it's my pleasure to welcome once again Dr. Sumantran to the show. Welcome, Dr. Sumantran.
Hello, Sumantran. Pleasure to be here.
Great. And so our theme today is COVID impact on the global supply chain. And let me start off the discussion today, Dr. Sumantran, by asking you, we have read reports of some strong market recovery in China from where this whole COVID-19 pandemic started. Now, if that is the market recovery scenario in China, could something similar be expected in India and other markets? But let's talk about India, maybe.
Well, first of all, the comparison has the offset in terms of timing. As you correctly observed, this whole thing started in Wuhan. So China first saw the emergence of the COVID threat, and then it went through its cycle of a huge number of cases, and they had their efforts to try to bring it under control. That was subsequently what spread to the rest of the world. So there is a timing offset in terms of when the onset of this pandemic happened in India. And so there was a lag in when we've seen the rise in the number of cases. And of course, even now we're experiencing the country's effort to actually bring it under control and let the economy come back. So there is an offset in timing issue. The second is, I think there might be a difference in the dynamics. All said and done, China is increasingly a global supplier. And as a result, the recovery in that industry will be in some ways tied to the recovery of demand in their customer countries or the customer organization. In India, a bulk of our output is consumed by domestic industry. So potentially, we can see a much more compact recovery. Although when and how it will start will depend on when we bring this under control and the lockdowns start to quell in the different cities and the regions.
Right. And also, in terms of this whole disruption in production, which started off, the early signs were seen as early as mid-January or late January. The industry never has seen such a huge disruption in production ever. Now, how can the challenge of restarting, or now that some of the industry players are restarted, ramping up, how can the challenges of these be lessened, according to you?
Well, what we're seeing around the world, we've already seen this in the US, we're seeing it in Europe, in fact, we're seeing it in China. As the economy starts to open up and people start to move out again, there is obviously a very high risk of resurgence in the number of cases. We're seeing this as it happens in the US this past week. So clearly, as we now think in India of opening up industries, a very, very significant and first priority will have to be with how we can actually get people to come out safely. And for the sake of industries, we must see how can we resume operations in a very safe way. This is important for looking after the health and safety of our employees, and also to make sure that this recovery can indeed be sustainable, that it doesn't result in a resurgence of cases and perhaps a second peak in the COVID cases.
Right.
Beyond this, of course, there's going to be very high fidelity of demand forecast. We're seeing demand come up at different rates in different parts of the country, so one's got to be have a very good control, being on top of when and how demand starts to recover. They have to link this to a product and a product portfolio rationalization, because the recovering market may have emphasis on a different product mix compared to what might have been expected. And finally, as we've seen, we have to be carefully orchestrating the entire supply chain. When you look at a single automaker, the number of tier 1 and then tier 2 and sometimes tier 3 suppliers that are involved are very large. They're spread out through the country. And they all have had different levels of financial stress. So to get this entire system orchestrated and back to running, they're all significant challenges. But if we are to do it very carefully, very sensibly, that would be the best way for us to maximize the speed of recovery.
Right. And in this episode, Dr. Samanthan, we are talking about the COVID impact on the global supply chain. Now, from an India perspective, do you think that timing couldn't have been more challenging? Because I'm saying from the perspective of we have just kind of embraced kind of leapfrog to BS6, which in other words also meant a kind of shooting up of say a lot of components imported which were otherwise not domestically available in BS4. The scenario would have been different, isn't it? Had it not been for this the new emission regime or the timing of it?
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate that COVID came at the time that we were just going through this regime change. The regime change, of course, had been planned and anticipated for many years, but it did leave or does leave the industry with two major challenges. One is this whole business of tapering off production of one set of products and starting the production of the second set, during which the newer BS6 products, this transition can happen when one can very carefully and finely control running out of inventory, or rather consuming inventory, and then starting the new supply chain. All this happened right at the time of COVID. So it was extremely chaotic in any industry's ability to manage this transition.
Right.
The second point that you mentioned is, yes, the BS6 has meant a much higher degree of emission control in all of the cars and vehicles with internal combustion engines. And this higher level of control has been achieved with a much higher degree of electronics. So you have more sensors, you have more processors, you have more sophisticated control systems to manage both the performance, emission, fuel efficiency, and so on. And this increase in the quantum of electronics has meant that, yes, we've had to go to more imports as at least a temporary measure. And in some ways, unfortunately, more China imports. Now, I think in the short term, people are going to have to somehow manage this transition. But over the longer period of time, I can only see that this is going to come about with a very focused effort to have localization and significantly increase local content.
And also, I mean, talking about COVID, talking about China, and again, now there's another dimension to this discussion related to China, and there's a kind of anti-China sentiment which is kind of taking shape. And there are calls for boycotting anything Chinese. Well, let's leave aside non-auto sectors. In the auto sector, is it realistic?
Well, I think unfortunately the debate in media has been almost binary. There are some people who say we should boycott products from China, and others who say it can't be done. I mean, nothing is binary. One would expect that there is an intelligent process of assessing what is the right strategy for the country and what is the right strategy for the industries in the country, because they're important to preserve jobs. I believe that there is a possibility for the country to adopt a position which says, wait a minute, we can't go back to business as usual, certainly with respect to China. On the other hand, we're not going to be doing something stupid to shoot ourselves in the foot. So this means that there is going to be a careful crafting of the policy. There is plenty of room for us to say there are places where we can impose a boycott sensibly. And this will be judged on the basis of A, what suits our economy in the best way. And secondly, with consideration as to where the signal that we send to China will be felt, because all said and done, there is a very undeniable geopolitical situation created by China. Now, this could mean that there are apex products, Chinese branded products, but one can say, there are many alternatives. Why would you want to buy these? You have many alternative choices, in which case you can make those choices. It could be Indian, it could be products from other markets, other countries that are, shall we say, favorable trading partners with India. And at the same time, that doesn't mean that we have to literally say we're going to import nothing. It calls for a sensible policy. It calls for intelligent crafting of strategy, and this requires the industry working closely with government to do it. So this noise about we are going to boycott or we can't do it, just two binary bookends. I think there is room for a sensible policy in the middle.
Right. Dr. Samantran, before we come to the end of this first segment, you've had a long and very accomplished career across various OEMs. Any examples or experience you can share, or maybe some anecdotes you can share, from which we may take some cue to tackle the current challenge better? Of course, there was never a pandemic like this, but in terms of this whole addressing a challenge of kind of unusual challenge of this nature.
I have several experiences where we've had smaller disruptions, and it is my experience that Indian organizations and Indian workforce, and especially the Indian management and staff and operators, they work remarkably well under challenging conditions. I remember, this goes back many years, when I was running the car business of Tata Motors, we had a logistics operator strike, and all logistics were shut down. And there was tremendous challenge to the organization, the supply chain function. And they rose to the challenge, and they did all sorts of remarkable things, right from the vice president right down to the junior most person on the line. And believe it or not, during those couple of weeks, as I recall, our production schedules and our adherence to schedules was better than even normal days. And that's because there was excessively, focused effort to make sure that the production line was running as expected. So, in a sense, sometimes we say in India, you throw people a challenge and they rise to the challenge in remarkable ways. Now, that's great. We have got tremendous adaptability. But would I recommend that as a prescription for how we run daily business? Absolutely not. I think that this is laudable. Our ability to rise to occasions, our ability to be adaptable is admirable. But we have to back this up with sensible, well-defined processes. For example, today, I think we're going to see a lot more of the deployment of things like Industry 4.0. Which means that there is better intelligence as to when parts are leaving suppliers or sub-suppliers, when they're coming into the OEM, how we're going to be able to orchestrate production to be optimal, how we're going to make sure that products reach out from OEMs to the dealerships in the right sequence, that there is a very close tying up between consumer demand and the supply chain orchestration. So we're going to see all that, and it's going to have to be factored into the system. So yeah, it's a mix of, it's nice to have an adaptable workforce that rise to challenges, but they must be supported with very good quality systems and processes.
Right said, Dr. Samantran, and I'm sure there may be CEOs who may be overseeing such kind of ramp up and such efforts in their organizations as we speak now, and we'll hear their stories later. It's time now to welcome the industry guest of this episode of A New Order. Our guest today is Mr. Jürgen Brandstetter, head of the Automotive Supply Chain Management and Senior Vice President at Continental AG. Jürgen, thank you for sparing your time and joining us in this discussion.
Thanks a lot.
All right, Jürgen, I believe that you are responsible for a business with a turnover of no less than 32 billion euros, which involves delivering parts of about 10.5 million parts to approximately 14,500 or 14,600 different locations. Plus, this whole restarting, recalibration of the global supply chain post COVID-19. How can business return to, let's say, at least about 60-75% of the pre-COVID state? There must be a lot of major regional differences, isn't it? And what will be the key levers to ensure that it works with as little bumps as possible in terms of the restart and ramping up of operations?
Okay, at first I have to say I'm not for the whole AG responsible for. only for the automotive sectors. And it means what, as you mentioned, we have to deliver approximately 10,000 parts per day to our customers, only to be correct. But referring your questions, I think for 2020, the market observes predict global production of under 7 million vehicles instead of close to 90, which would represent a decline of more than 20% year on year. And the figures for this year so far speak for themselves. Production is down by 25% in China and US, and 40% in Europe. And the year-on-year production in China will be up slightly in the second quarter, with Europe lagging significantly behind, and the US is somewhere in between. Recovery is likely the slowest in Europe, what we see so far, where the automotive industry will report losses of billions in euros in the second quarter. The extent of the crisis is unlikely higher what we experienced in 2009. This is evidenced by the unemployment figures in the US and the short-time work in Europe. It is further evidenced to the significant drop in gross domestic product and the size of the Westwood baggage in China, Japan, US, and Europe, of course. The corona pandemic has created major supply chain problems for companies worldwide, as you can imagine. The local government restrictions and an uncertain market situation have resulted in fluctuating or in many cases lower demands or even in shutdowns. And we understand that it's just as important for us to have a clear view of our customer demand. This was the most challenging task out of our, how we're managing our crisis. And our suppliers expect the same from us too, of course. Therefore, we have been working closely with our customers and suppliers globally in maintaining a high level of transparency in order to remain optimal productive in this dynamic environment. To keep our supply chain flexible as possible, we're also adapting our call-offs from customers, adapting our shift models as necessary, based on the customer demands and call.
Dr. Sumantran, do you have any questions?
Thank you. Yeah, it's a very complex task at this point. One of the observations has been, the auto industry has spent the last 20, 25 years as a part of globalization to have created a global supply chain that has been optimized for efficiency, cost efficiency, quality efficiency, and so on. But all of a sudden, with COVID, we suddenly see this whole issue of the resilience of the supply chain. We already saw a bit of this at the Fukushima tsunami, when the major part of the supply chain was disrupted. But now with COVID, it's almost global. So how does a company like Conti, and of course, similar to other automakers and tier ones, how are we going to balance this issue of optimizing a supply chain for efficiency, but now increasingly also having to introduce resilience? People are talking about more local factories, more nearshore factories, a multiplicity of factories to balance efficiency with resilience. How does a company like Conti deal with this?
Oh, that is a great question. So far, we're working on the answer. And the first task, what we have to do is to build up transparency and predict our, I would say, customer demands as we see. And it's not an easy task, I would say. It's, we say, the step to look in the future. And the other step is, of course, to make our supply chains more robust. Robust means for us that we are able to have dual source on the supplier side, to have usage out of plants that are able to produce same products that we are able to deliver in different countries. But in this case, in such a crisis, we have to use, of course, different transport modes to keep our customers running. But I can say we are well prepared. We have new systems in place and processes to maintain or to manage such a crisis in a proper manner. And the feedback what we got out of our customers Their trust in our behavior and the trust that we are able to keep the supply chain running. But the fully answer, it's not found so far, I'll be honest to you. We still work on it to be much more professional step by step.
The other thing that's happened with this whole COVID cycle for the industry, both for automakers as well as tier ones, is the extent to which it has impacted financials. No industry can go for such a long time with very significant output drops, some places shut down the factories and so on. So this has really created a lot of financial stress. Cash flows are affected, credit lines are stretched and so on. At the same time, this is an industry, and I'm sure a company like Conti is having to invest a lot of money in electrification, connectivity. A lot of these technologies are on their way here, and they all demand a lot of investment. Will this result, therefore, in a greater degree of collaboration, cooperation? Because at the end of the day, you only have so much investment, and you have to cover a lot of area, and you're coming out of very badly affected financials. Will this promote collaborations, partnerships, joint ventures, maybe even mergers?
It's a good question, I have to say. But I think joint ventures and collaborations could be a part of the solution. However, in this unprecedented economic scenario, also government intervention is one key. Investment and support incentives are needed not only for the electric vehicles, but also for the large number of vehicles state-of-the-art combustion engines that we are already waiting at manufacturers or dealers. But every vehicle, I'm sure, that replaces an old one today also contributes toward climate and environmental protective system. And the industry is, of course, trying to cut costs intelligently and minimize layoffs. But a slow recovery of the economic would likely see the loss of many jobs in the whole world.
Well, another issue that seems to be cropping up is already begin, even before COVID, for the last 15, 20 years, we've seen that there has been a migration of content away from OEMs to tier one, particularly because of the electronification of cars, more computers, more systems, and therefore the value addition by tier ones is increasing compared to the value addition at OEMs. Again, I see now with the onset of electrification, all auto companies pay their own engines typically. Increasingly, when it's an electric drivetrain, people are saying, well, maybe motors don't have to be made by OEMs, batteries don't have to be made by OEMs. So it is likely to shift to more work going from inside the OEM to outside, and therefore the work content at tier one is going to increase. Is this something that you see happening across the globe, and how is Conti prepared to deal with this kind of an increase in, shall I say, value addition in the industry?
But let's phrase up your comments in regards to make the cars more intelligent. And to make cars more intelligent means they need more, I would say, electronic, of course, and software content. And in regards to that, I give you some views out of Continental or views out of me. Yes, we see certainly an increased reliance on suppliers for value addition. Only my example is the responsible for system architecture is shifting from customers to the tier one suppliers gradually, as the software content in cars increases to make all these great things happen. Today, 90% of the software volume in the vehicle is sourced from first-tier suppliers. Manufacturers have recognized that software development is a core competency or a differentiator, I will say like this, and that is critical for the success of car manufacturing. They want to hire, and that's the reason they want to hire thousands of software engineers in the coming years. But this is not a threat for us suppliers, I'm sure. Even if our software share is reduced from 90 to 60% or lower, or something in between, we anticipate a tenfold increase of overall market for software in the next 5 to 10 years, which we see also in the, I would say, outside of the car manufacturing industry. What means that the software components which suppliers are responsible for will continue multiple considerably. And I'm sure in this regards, manufacturers and suppliers have to be in the same boat. Either we win out against attackers, I would say, so companies not known to today, from the other sectors, or we lose together. That's very important. We have to be very close with our customers and car manufacturers in this regard.
Sumatra, I'll turn it back to you.
In terms of the tier 2 or tier 3 suppliers, continental suppliers, in this supply chain disruption, what kind of an approach are you taking to ensure that they also come back online as soon as possible, or what kind of assistance or hand-holding maybe you may be offering them?
Oh, at first we are very close investigating the markets and the government restriction in these regions or states, how the suppliers are able to relaunch his production facilities. That's the one first. The second one, we have a close, I will say, reporting in regards if suppliers comes in a critical situation. And then our purchasing colleagues are jump in, investigate, find solutions as well to secure our, I will say, demands out of the suppliers. It's once the last 4 or 5 months, if we see, on the one hand, China market recovered, European market, I will say, shut down, goes down, and the Americans, there's something in between. We see it's the whole community in Continental makes a great job, very close to each other, and find every time a solution to survive. But we have one big advantage, that we are able to shift products from one to the other plant, not for each product, for several, but it gives you more room to maneuver all these things. You can imagine.
Right. Understood. Jürgen, last question for you. Ever since, say, around January and February onwards, when this whole pandemic kind of broke out and beyond China, there are concerns about supply chains that involve China. And also there are some other geopolitical reasons. Will these trends impact the overall auto supply chain in the coming years? As in, let's say, for example, would there be a growing case for, let's look at how we can reduce our dependency on China maybe, or something like that?
No, I think there is no room for protectionism or nationalism in manufacturing, in my point of view. Supply chains are globalized today. We worked last 20 years, and it wouldn't work out to an advantage for all for buyers and customers anywhere if they were to be highly localized. And as an example, during the Corona pandemic, China entered the recovery mode as you went into lockdown. Totally different situations, but Continental was able to leverage based on its global footprint to maintain its supply chain with no disruption to our customers. In my point of view, protectionism is not an option. We are in a global world, and the rules are globally, and I think it gives us also more benefit for each of us.
Great. Yes. Well said, Jürgen. There you are, viewers. Jürgen Bronstarter, head of the, let me get it correct, Jürgen Bronstarter, head of the Automotive Supply Chain Management and Senior Vice President of Continental Automotive. Jürgen, really appreciate you sparing your time and joining us in this discussion with some very valuable inputs. Thank you very much.
I have to thank you for the chance to speak with you. And take care. Take care, guys.
You too. Take care. Bye-bye.
Stay safe.
Bye.
So we had a very enriching and interesting discussion with Jürgen Bronstarter. Dr. Sumatran, what do you think? Now, we discussed about this whole kind of argument of boycotting Chinese, anything Chinese, especially in the current context in India. But let me put it another way. Now, to what extent do you think India can be self-sufficient when it comes to the automotive supply chain? And obviously there seems to be an argument for it, especially now that we have moved to BS6. But to what level do you think the Indian industry can or should strive to be self-sufficient?
Well, modern economies are not designed to require countries to be completely self-sufficient. What I mean by this is we've always expected in the whole course of globalization to say that different countries are good at different things, and collectively, in a multilateral sense, we're able to achieve, common progress for all the players. So, for example, we may import a lot of oil from Saudi Arabia. We may export a lot of auto components to Europe, and Europe may supply a lot of oil drilling equipment to Saudi Arabia. So all players in this system have things that they do well, that they can export, they can import, and there is some balance of trade. That is essentially the way multilateral trade is designed to function. Now, this can be corrupted when one or two players don't play by the rules. And in our case, we've seen in the last 20, 30 years that China has run up a huge trade surplus with almost every country that it deals with. It has a huge trading surplus with Europe, with North America. We've seen it with India. We've seen it with other countries in Southeast Asia. So I think the challenge is going to be to saying, how can we make this multilateral system work effectively? But having said that, separately, one has to look at the totality of what any country can do. And India is a large country. It's a large market. It has a huge purchasing power index, and therefore the scale of economy is deceptively large. And there is an opportunity for a greater quantum of local content and self-sufficiency. We've seen this in many products. When you look at some of the two-wheeler manufacturers in India, I don't see, apart from a few components that they have to import, understandably, they've achieved a very high degree of self-sufficiency. Their products are globally competitive, both not only on quality, but also on cost. I remember, for instance, when a global entity like Renault Nissan decided to produce or develop and produce the Renault Kwid in India. On day one, they started the product production with 97% of local content. Yeah. So this is not something that we can't do. We can do it, but it also means that when we have to import something, we can import it, but in a sensible way so that we manage overall trade. At the end of the day, it's not just a trade surplus is not a number that you're proud of. Trade surplus is a matter of the number of jobs that are created in the country, and therefore the quantum of economy that's created in the country that one should be proud of.
Right, absolutely. Absolutely. And also now, I would also like to ask you, as tier ones, we are talking about the supply chain, as tier ones look to offer more value and therefore move from being, let's say, parts or component supplier to supplier of subsystems. Could that also now, that is kind of gaining pace, that trend now, could that lead to some restructuring or reorientation of the overall supply industry, or could there be new opportunities for some, for example?
Well, I'm an old hand at this, so I've seen over the last 35 years this pendulum swing about, the suppliers consolidating, getting bigger. For example, in the 1990s, I remember there was a major advertising campaign by Magna as a large tier one, and they said, we're not a tier one, we're a tier 0.5, because they said we're almost an OEM, because they, for example, they made a complete interior module. So that means instrument panel, cockpit, airbags, instrumentation, HVAC systems, the seating. So they made the entire cockpit module, and they said we're not a tier 1, we're a tier 0.5. So there was
they also contract manufacturer.
Yeah, exactly. So there was a huge amount of consolidation. Then we saw over the last 10 years, I would say, a fragmentation. We've seen big tier 1 makers like Delphi, Visteon, Vallejo actually break apart because they have seen a new era coming upon the auto industry. This era has a greater degree of emphasis on electronics, software, systems that are going to be mostly intelligent systems. And they've been moving away from many of the hardware-related elements. So in fact, many of these actually broke up companies like Delphi and Visteon, for But now we're entering a new phase when we're going to see a growing penetration of electric vehicles in this business. And again, one might see a change in this direction of the pendulum swing. Automakers, as we said earlier, used to make their own engines, very often made their engine systems, made their transmissions. In a world where cars are going to be EVs, automakers may say they don't need to make motors anymore. Maybe they don't need to make battery packs anymore. And all this means that this could again become part of a propulsion system module that can be outsourced. And this means the key suppliers of these propulsion systems could become significant players in the industry. So I think we've seen this evolution over time. And I have no doubt that we will see some change significantly, particularly linked to the onset of electrification.
Right. I get it. You get it. And electrification could be the key driver.
Potential.
Yes. And so, Dr. Sumantran, with that, it brings us to the end of this episode and also the end of our trilogy, if you like, on discussions on the business of the automotive industry. Well, I would like to know, what are your thoughts on the post-lockdown industry performance so far? Could there be any surprises in terms of, say, market movement or technology trend or even brand performance, for example?
Yeah, I think at this stage, the recovery is still underway. People are not yet able to predict the trajectory of this recovery, both for the economy and for the auto industry. The forecast of demand recovery is also very spotty. There are false surges in demand, and then one is again seeing dips. So I think there is still going to be some time before one can more confidently predict the trajectory of this recovery. But there will be certainly capacity right sizing in many ways, whether it's because people have started to do work from home, whether electronic teleconferences and telepresence tools are making people rethink the need to travel. This whole business of social distancing being a deterrent for some people to move out of the house. There are changes in demand patterns, and this will undoubtedly require companies, at least in certain countries and regions, to start to think about right sizing. You can't carry too much capacity going forward. There will therefore be a question about, are all brands going to survive? If you start to see a downsizing in the industry, would some brands be preferably or preferentially benefited, and will others face an unusually challenging time in terms of what they will face? I think one of the challenges that we were anticipating is how much of this is going to be focused on the immediate, solving immediate problems, and therefore saying investment for the future can wait. I have to get my finances right now. On that issue, it's a little encouraging that even as people are addressing the near term, the signals we're getting across Europe, US, and even in India is that things like future relevant technologies, we talked about electrification as an example, that perhaps is not going to be pushed away, even as we address the short-term emergency that we have for financials. And in the longer term, maybe combined with the way people live, all of this work from home, and the new travel demands may lead to changes in urban mobility architectures. And I know we're going to come to that in the last episode about future mobility. So that may provide some surprises in terms of how cities arrange themselves. So it's going to be a lot of change, but this is an industry that is used to a lot of change. COVID has been a particularly deep and sharp impact, but I have no doubt that the industry is robust, it will survive, and it will have to adapt to survive.
On that note, Dr. Sumantran, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts, and it's always a pleasure having an interaction with you. And viewers, we would like to thank you very much for really the kind of feedback that we have been receiving on the episodes under the series A New Order. And I'm sure you will like watching this episode as you have enjoyed watching this episode as well, and look forward to the fourth and final episode of A New Order, which will talk about urban mobility in the new normal, in the post-COVID world. So thank you very much, viewers, for your support and your feedback. And thank you very much, Dr. Samantran.
Thank you, Sumatra.
Goodbye. Take care and stay safe.